So even if you grabbed something hot 50 years ago, you're still not going to grab something hot because your experience tells you not to. But yet, what is the base of that experience? And that was when you were 5 years old, you grabbed something hot and it hurt. And you learned from it, and you didn't grab anything hot anymore.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out once again. Want to pause and remind you that we are sponsored by two great companies, Alamode being one of them. Alamode is it's the company that I use for my software and have for over 2 decades, almost 3 decades, believe it or not. And they've been in business for much longer than that. And there's a reason they're number one. Check them out by going to alamode.com. That's spelled ALAMODE or 800 Alamode. And we're sponsored by Working RE magazine. Working RE is providing great education for appraisers in the form of information. Don't you want to be informed about your chosen career? Check it out. Go to workingre.com. Again, it's workingre.com. I want to welcome back to the program a friend of the program, been on many times, and his expertise never disappoints. His name is Mr. Tim Andersen. He is the appraiser advocate. Tim, welcome back, my friend.
Dustin, thank you. How are you and how are your family?
Beautiful and wonderful, maybe not necessarily in that order.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
And yours?
The ones I know of are just fine. But, I went to high school, so the ones I know of are just fine.
Fair enough. Tim, welcome back to the program. I really appreciate your expertise, your knowledge. One of the things that you do, Tim, I might just start out with this because it's going to make more sense as to what we're going to get into for our first topic today, is you provide a service to appraisers who might find themselves, I'm not going to say in trouble with, but at least before the state board with, a complaint's been made, they've done an appraisal, somebody complained somewhere, and now they've got to defend themselves. And one of the first things that I suggest to people when they reach out to me and say, hey, Dustin, I got this complaint and I'm scared. What should I do? One of the first things I do is say, call the appraiser's advocate, Tim Andersen. Tell me a little bit more about your services there, Tim.
Dustin, thank you. I help appraisers who get that letter. And the point is because this is now a legal issue. This is not appraisal anymore. This is now a legal issue. And while I'm not an attorney, I do understand what state boards are looking for. I've dealt with enough of them, and I've assembled a collection of the questions they tend to ask. And I can help appraisers answer those questions truthfully, accurately, as well as in a manner that is not going to self-indict them, which is extremely important. Because as our friends on the TV show says, anything you say can and will be used against you, and that is true. Yeah. So you want to respond to the state truthfully, accurately, timely, etc., but you don't want to give them any reason to further prosecute you. So there are ways to do that. And those are some of the services I provide.
Awesome. And part of that process, of course, is you, even though you started out as a very intelligent and informed individual, I assume the longer you do this, the more intelligent and informed you get, meaning the more state board complaints you see. And I assume you start to see some patterns that, whether you're in Florida or Alaska, you might see some similarities in what the state boards are asking and complaining about. Is that correct?
Well, the jury is probably still out on the intelligence part, but yeah, the other part's just fine.
So what I want to do today, Tim, if you'll indulge, is maybe just hit on one of the things that you bring out quite often, both in our online and offline conversations, that you see quite frequently. And that is state boards are very interested in an appraiser's work file. When they reach out and there's been a complaint, they typically don't just ask for the appraisal report. I'm guessing most of the time they have it in front of them, but they ask for the appraisal report and the work file. Why are state boards so interested in an appraiser's work file?
Dustin, the work file is actually the appraisal, and the appraisal has to comply with standard 1. So the appraisal board that you're coming up before wants to see your relationship to standard 1. Does your appraisal comply with standard 1? And many of the questions the board will ask will contain the words show, demonstrate, or explain. And there must be enough data in the work file so that you can show, demonstrate, and or explain that in developing your value conclusion, you followed standard 1. And we'll talk about standard 2, which is the reporting standard in a minute. But the state, most of the questions the state board will ask are going to be framed in the context of, show us out of your work file how you handled issue A. And if you can show the state out of the work file how you handled issue A, you're not going to have a problem. Whereas if you don't have those data in the work file, or you don't have reference to those data in another work file, then there might be some problems with the state. So actually, the best way to avoid a problem with the state is to have all this stuff in the work file. Now, appraisers say, yeah. I've been appraising since 1990, so I've heard that for nearly 30 years. So, but what does it mean? Well, the point is, it means exactly what it says. If you go to the records keeping rule, that 5th bullet point says, and everything else and anything else that you used or depended on to come to your value conclusion. So that means studies, that means surveys, that means stuff other people have done that you have. For example, the HFHA website has the HPI, the Home Price Index, and you can use that as one way to show changes in value over time. Now, it's accurate insofar as it goes, but because it doesn't get into individual neighborhoods,
right,
that shouldn't be the last place you go, but that's a good place to start. And you would have some kind of screenshot or something in your work file showing what you did, but more important, the state wants to see the filters you applied. Obviously, you're going to put the proper state, and you're going to put the proper city or the proper MSA. And then you're going to put, say, for example, you wanted to study changes between 2020, 2021, and 2022. Then you're going to have 3 sets of filters. You're going to have January 1 to December 31st, 2020, January 1 to December 31st, 2021, and then January 1st to, we're recording this at the end of 2022, January 1st to the end of 2022. So you can compare changes in value over time. Well, you should show in your work file the filters you applied, which would be those 3 years. And then if somebody says, well, why these 3 years? You can respond, well, simple, there's no reason to go back any further. There are plenty of data from these 3 years. I was able to get a basis for my change in value based on what's here. Then that should be one of the sources of change in value. And the other one could possibly be a study from the same time periods of local MLS data. And again, you're going to show your filters, and you're going to show, you might have started out with an MLS area number, and then you might have gone to a specific neighborhood, and then you might have gone to a map where you delineated 4 corners within the neighborhood within which you wanted to study changes in value over time. You would have all of those data as well, screenshots or references to them or something like that as well. That way, when the state says, okay, how did you come up with 8% a year appreciation rate, you can show them. And so the state may disagree with you, but if you've got support for the 8%, that's about 95% of the battle right there.
Exactly. Yeah. And a couple things we talked about earlier today, and just full disclosure, we're recording this podcast after Tim was a guest on one of my monthly meetings with the coach. We do that every month with our all-star team. We had a group gather together virtually, and Tim gave an excellent presentation to the group on how to stay out of trouble with the state board, at least as much as you can, and what to do when that happens. But one of the things you said in that meeting, Tim, the reason I bring it up is you pointed out that, and I know you alluded to this earlier, that standard 1 is about report development. You called it the appraisal, right? The appraisal. Standard 2 is about how you report that. One of the things that you talked about in our meeting was, of course, the fact that, if you're doing a restricted report, you're stating things. If you're doing, say, a 1004, you are summarizing things. But either way, you still have an equal report work file that would show the process that you went through to come up with that value, correct?
Right. You have the appraisal, the work file is basically going to be the same. I mean, you can report the appraisal on the back of an envelope if you can write small enough.
Sure.
So the reporting, USPAP doesn't get all excited about how you report your appraisal to your client. Now, appraisers tend to get all involved in the 1004 form, et cetera. Remember, that's something the GSEs sponsor. That's got nothing to do with USPAP. So basically, all you have to do is cover the 14 points of USPAP, which is standard 2-2A. And how you cover that, the vehicle in which you cover that, USPAP doesn't care about, just that you cover them. And of course, standard 1 is how you develop your appraisal. And if you develop your appraisal properly and then report it non-misleadingly, if you develop your appraisal according to standard 1 and then report it according to standard 2, you don't have a problem. If you don't, there may be an issue.
So it's one thing to make an adjustment of, say, $67 a square foot for the difference in gross living area. It's a whole other question. And the question really that the state board is digging into is to why you did that. Where's the support for that? And I assume the statement that I have in my work file, Tim, which is because I've been doing it this way for 30 years is not going to cut it.
No, it does not cut it. Simply because maybe you've been doing it wrong for 30 years. I mean, there was a time when doctors described smoking for indigestion, saying, oh yeah, smoke a cigarette after dinner and that'll calm your stomach. Very well may have, but it also brought about lung cancer, and I'd rather have indigestion than lung cancer. So just because you've done something one way for so long doesn't mean it's right. Yeah. It's traditional. And even though from Fiddler on the Roof, we learned that there are wonderful traditions out there, just because it's traditional doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah. So what advice would you give, Tim? And maybe I would approach this question differently and ask, as you are advocating for appraisers, which is what you do, someone comes to you and here's a state board complaint and you're assisting them to get the best outcome that they possibly could get. What are some things that come to your mind, one or two things that you see over and over again, that if you could go back in time and advise that appraiser, what advice would you give them regarding work files? What specifically do you see coming up over and over and over again that you just go, oh, if you had just done this, this would be a whole lot easier?
Okay. Dustin, most states, as part of an investigation, will send out a series of questions it wants you to answer. And your answers to those questions may make the whole thing go away, or it may not. But let me read one of the questions that you can probably assume that you're going to get from your state. Now, I've got a whole bunch of questions. We're not going to go through every one of them. These are actual questions from actual states, not one state, but the various states. And one of them, which tends to follow throughout all the states, says, please describe the process or processes by which you chose your comparable sales, as well as show from the data in your work file how and why you chose them. Now, that question goes on, but we're going to stop right there. Now, what does that statement mean? It has no meaning. It has no context. It communicates nothing. It leads the appraiser, it leads the client nowhere. So as a result, Dustin, in the context of your question, what should have the appraiser said to avoid having to answer this question? Basically, okay, appraiser, why did you choose these sales? Now, the answer is, well, because I'd already confirmed them and I had them in my computer. No, that's not the right answer.
That's not the right answer.
No, the right answer is because I pulled 10 sales out of this neighborhood, confirmed all 10 of them. And when I did that, I found 6 of them were not arm's length transactions. And 2 of them really were comparable, which left me with 4 sales, which are the ones I put in the report. That explains why you chose those sales. That explains the process behind that choice. And this is what the state wants to know. So as a result, instead of saying I chose these sales, say I chose these sales because. That's what the state's looking for. Right. That's what it means by please describe the processes by which you chose your comparable sales. It's looking to see how you chose them, why you chose them, what filters did you apply to get these particular sales, why you didn't use the sale next door. Maybe the sale next door sold, but it sold as part of a divorce. Well, that's a really good reason not to use it as a comp, because that's not an arm's length transaction. So you'd say that because chances are the AMC will find the sale next door. And then even though it says it sold for $100, they'll still say, well, why didn't you use the sale next door? Right. When you beat them to that punch, when you say, yeah, I found the sale next door and it sold for $100 and other good and valuable consideration, and I called the title company to confirm it, and they said, yeah, that was a divorce. Okay, there's the filter. There's why you chose not to use it, even though it sold 2 weeks ago and it was the property next door.
One of the things I hear you saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like appraisers get themselves in trouble when they really don't have a good answer. Not necessarily that their answer is true and correct or factual in the sense that, we still make decisions, and those decisions may be based on our education, our background, our experience, our, fill in the blank. I guess what I'm saying, Tim, is it seems like as long as you have a viable, I'm going to use the word viable, a viable answer for why you did what you did, that it's not just made up out of thin air, that's going to put you in a much better position with a state board than just saying something like I joked about earlier, that this is the way I've been doing it for 30 years.
Yeah, that is not what you say.
Right.
You say that I have appraised these types of properties before, and in doing so, I hired a trainee. For your neck of the woods, I hired a trainee to discover the relationship between a view with the Tetons and a view without the Tetons.
Mm-hmm.
And the trainee indicated that adjustment was 12%. And I have those data in another file. I reference them here. And if you want me to send you the details of that study, I'll be happy to.
Right.
But just to say, well, that's the way I've always done it is probably true. But that's not the right answer, because that's an explanation. That's not support.
Right.
And not to support the adjustments. Yeah.
And let me ask it a little bit different way. My point is the way that you support it, as long as it's a viable way to support, may be different than the state board would maybe have an opinion on, meaning somebody on the state board thinks that you should have used regression analysis, and instead you used paired sales, right? My point is do you see appraisers getting in trouble because they don't have an answer at all as to where they came from, where they came up with their adjustment, or because they had a way to come up with it that the state board thought, well, there's a better way to do that?
Okay. Is that possible? Sure, it's possible. Is that what typically happens? No. The state is looking for you to support your conclusion. If you can support it, and that's not with a sincere heart and a gentle hand, if you can support it, then you're fine. Whereas if you can't support it, there are going to be some issues.
Yeah.
And, let's face it, we all have to draw on our experience. We all get to draw on our experience. But then our experience somewhere has a base. Well, invoke that base. Bring that base to the fore. What experience, what happened to give you that experience? I think all of us at one time or another in our lives have grabbed something hot and regretted it. And therefore, in the future, we didn't grab something hot because we learned in the past not to grab something hot. Okay. So even if you grabbed something hot 50 years ago, you're still not going to grab something hot because your experience tells you not to. But yet, what is the base of that experience? And that was when you were 5 years old, you grabbed something hot and it hurt. And you learned from it, and you didn't grab anything hot anymore. Well, the application is that when you're 70 years old, you don't grab something hot because of something you learned at 5 years old. So your experience tells you not to grab something hot, but what was the basis for that experience? Well, that happened when you grabbed something hot, and you learned very quickly not to do that. So what's the basis for the 12% adjustment for the Teton view? The survey your trainee did 5 years ago showed you there was a 12% difference. And State Board, I will be happy to send you a copy of that study if you ask me to. That works.
We're talking with Mr. Tim Andersen. He, of course, is the appraiser's advocate. We've been talking, Tim, so far about state boards. I want to come back from the break here and talk a little bit about Fannie Mae, because there's some things going on with Fannie Mae that I'd love to get your opinion on. First, I want to pause here and remind our great listeners of some great companies out there. Number one is Working RE Magazine. Working RE, of course, is providing excellent education, information for appraisers on a regular basis and for free. Folks, all you have to do is sign up for their blog. Their blog allows you to get their articles on your email. And yes, some you're going to read, some you're not. Make that decision. But folks, there are some articles you do not want to miss. Sign up by going to workingre.com, workingre.com. And a la mode, of course, is sponsoring the program from the very beginning. And they have been my appraisal software of choice from the very beginning of my career, my mentor before that. And there's a reason they are number one, folks. The number of things that are embedded in the service itself, folks, makes up the value by spades. I cannot tell you how often I've looked at other companies and have gone back to Alamode because of what it helps me to do to be more efficient and make more money as a real estate appraiser, which of course is what we are all about. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. Welcome back to the program. We're talking with my friend and the appraiser's advocate, Mr. Tim Andersen. Thank you for joining us today, Tim.
Oh, Dustin, thank you. It's great to be here with you. I appreciate it.
It's always good to have you. The information you share is absolutely wonderful. I want to briefly, and we don't have a lot of time left, Tim, but I do want to briefly talk about, because I've seen an uptick as you know, I have clients across the country, appraisers who might belong to my all-star team, might belong to, my dream team, might be doing personal coaching, might just reach out to me and say, hey, I got this letter from Fannie Mae. I've seen an uptick in the number of letters that are being sent out from Fannie Mae to state boards, number one, and appraisers themselves. Have you seen the same thing?
Yes, Fannie Mae, I'm not going to go into the political region, but Fannie Mae has a responsibility to do due diligence. And this results in a number of appraisals every so often being audited. And many times an audit will raise a question. For example, let's go back to $67 a square foot. The audit your last 10 appraisals you did for Fannie Mae, and in each one of them you use $67 a square foot for your GLA adjustment. Well, Fannie's going to want to know why, because that just really doesn't make a lot of sense. So when Fannie sends that quality letter, it's looking for a response more than it's looking for an exact answer. And your response might be, gosh, thank you for pointing that out to me. I appreciate it. This is clearly an area which I need to change, and I will do so immediately. And that'll probably satisfy Fannie Mae. Now, sometimes, and yes, it is happening more often, sometimes Fannie Mae is willing to send that letter into the state. Now, not all states will accept an unsigned complaint. Some will, some won't. The complaints come in unsigned. It's just a form letter from Fannie Mae. So there is no human signature on it.
Oh, interesting.
And if your state does not accept those, then it just gets thrown in the garbage can. If there's a signature, or if your state will accept anonymous complaints, then the state must act on it. Now, when the state acts on it, it has to open a file, and it will probably assign an investigator. They have to understand that the investigators are overworked and underpaid. And they have to, they're a whole lot more interested in bank robbers than they are in jaywalkers. So they may give your case the most cursory of coverage and say, oh, there's nothing here, and send that off to the state. You get a letter saying, Fannie Mae sent this in, but we're not going to worry about it. Okay. Or the investigator may say, well, Dustin, yeah, we want to see this report. So you send the report in, and the investigator looks at it and says, Dustin, I don't see anything here. I'm going to recommend the state not do anything. And then you get a letter 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 87 weeks later saying, Dustin, we're not going to do anything. Or the state investigator says, Dustin, this is serious stuff. We're going to have to do some talking on this. In that case, you're going to do some talking. But just because Fannie Mae sends something into the state doesn't mean your career as an appraiser is over. It doesn't even mean your career as an appraiser is going to stall. Right. It just means that for a little while, you're going to be really busy handling the complaint from the state, and may go away, frankly, may not, but you have to play that by ear.
This is a great time to bring up your services, Tim, because I know one of the services, many services that you provide to appraisers is, as your title indicates, you're an advocate for appraisers. If they have one of those state board complaints, how do they get a hold of you? And tell us a little bit about what you do as far as services provided.
Dustin, thank you. From a standpoint of the services I provide, I explain to the appraiser what's going on. I explain to the appraiser the process they'll have to go through. I explain to them how it might turn out. The result may be, hey, there's no problem, or there might be a different result. And then my advocacy is basically saying, rather than get this letter from the state and then change, why don't you change first so you don't have to get this letter from the state? Which is why I encourage appraisers to send me a couple of their appraisals so I can go over them and look for items in there that is going to raise some red flags with somebody. And when appraisers do that, I can advocate for them in the sense of, here's what to avoid for problems in the future. Now, as you know, I'm not an attorney. I don't try to be an attorney. I recommend attorneys. But then if it's going up before a state, while the attorney is an expert on things legal, the attorney is probably, with some exceptions, not an expert on things appraisal. So that's where I come in. I explain what's going on from an appraisal standpoint. So the attorney can defend the appraiser or negotiate the best possible settlement. And then if somebody wants to get in touch with me, which I appreciate, thank you. My email is tim@theappraisersadvocate.com, and send me an email and we'll get started.
One more time, your email.
tim@theappraisersadvocate.com.
Mr. Tim Andersen, thank you. My best to you, your family. I do appreciate all of your time and your expertise. Always valuable.
Dustin, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
Well, how can they be anything else?
Right.
The statement makes no sense. Okay. And it makes no sense. It communicates nothing. So if it's okay, editor, I'm sorry. This may be an emergency. I got to take this.
Take it. No problem.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Go ahead and mute yourself.